All right, so let's get started. I do have a GitHub repository for the examples I'll be working on in front of you today. I'm going to drop that in the chat. So if you do want to pull it up during or after, you can feel free. Okay. So getting started with PHP. First, let's answer, what is PHP? What does that even stand for? What are we here for? It's an interpreted general purpose scripting language. It's been around since about 94. There's a Danish Canadian named Rasmus Lerdorf who in around 1993-1994 wanted an easier way to maintain common features on his personal home page. And that's where PHP comes from, personal homepage. As he developed this tool, he decided he wanted to make it open source and free for other people to use. In its earliest days, it was essentially optimized for things like page counters and guest books, as was popular at the time. Outside of that, once it hit about 1995, he did an official release to share with everybody. It became, or it was rather, well received. Lots of people had feature requests, so it started to grow and grow and grow from there. At the current date, PHP stands for PHP Hypertext Preprocessor, which is kind of funny that the P in PHP stands for PHP itself. The typing in this language is dynamic and weak, much like JavaScript. It's pretty forgiving compared to a lot of other languages, so it's pretty easy to get started with, but it's also easy to build bad habits, so it's something to watch out for when working with PHP. It's capable of procedural, functional, and object-oriented programming, so again, it's very free and flexible, so if you know what you're doing, know what you want to do, you can probably end up doing it. It's also open source and free to use, which lends to its popularity. Why not use PHP? So again, to compare it to JavaScript, it's very, very widely used, which means when you're looking for examples, you'll find plenty of good ones, but you could end up coming across bad ones. There's also lots of bad code out there just because of that popularity, right? If everyone and their dog's using it, it's easy for there to be lots of bad examples out there, lots of poor code, not very secure code if you're not careful, right? Because with that freedom comes responsibility. You should be doing your due diligence to ensure that you're writing secure scripts. It's fast to learn, which again can be good or bad, because if you learn very haphazardly and don't pick up good habits, that's something that can kind of follow you well into your career. The weak typing as well, it becomes hard to predict what's going in and out of functions. Languages like C# or Java often provide a lot more structure to your code. So when you're writing a method in a class or something like that, you essentially end up defining what's going in and out, right? With PHP, it's kind of a mystery. You have to very carefully read the code or be careful to add additional documentation, usually in the form of comments. Sometimes PHP might not just be the best fit for the job as well. So if you're writing a machine learning application, you might want to go with Python because they have a lot more libraries available to help you out with that stuff, right? PHP also doesn't have a lot of great tooling for desktop-based applications or mobile-based applications in terms of actually running in that interface. So if you want to double-click an exe on your desktop and have that pop up in a window and be an application, PHP is probably not the best bet for that. While there are tools for it, it's just it was built with web in mind, and it's also great as a command line tool. So it's more tooled for that. Why use PHP? I know I just compared it to JavaScript as a bad thing, but I can also compare it to JavaScript as a good thing. Much like JavaScript, it is loosey-goosey. It's forgiving. It's really easy to just play with or make a quick and dirty script to get something done. And if you take the time to structure it nicely, it can also be a tool used to write fantastic code that is very secure if you spend that time. So it's kind of a good all-purpose solution to potentially a lot of different situations you may come across. Because of its very forgiving nature, it's also, I think, pretty fun to learn. And as an interpreted language, you can basically make quick changes to your code, run it again, and see what happens, whether it gives you an error or it works. In contrast to things like C#, where as your project grows and grows and grows, the compile time may grow from seconds to minutes to who knows how long, right? So once you've implemented a feature, if you want to see how it works in a compiled language, you may end up waiting for, again, minutes or even hours to be able to get your hands on it and run it and see how it's working. With something like PHP or other interpreted languages like JavaScript, Python, Ruby, you get to write code, press play, and boom, you get to see the result right away. And then you can make changes and see what happens again and again. PHP is also hard to avoid if you get into web development. More than 70% of the known web is powered to some degree by PHP. It comes default on many servers and operating systems. So it's super useful in a pinch, super popular, it's free. So yeah, you kind of see it everywhere. It's also what powers WordPress, the most powerful, well, not powerful, but in terms of market share, the largest CMS on the planet right now. And I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. So if you end up, again, maintaining web servers and websites, you'll probably end up having to deal with WordPress at one point or another. So it doesn't hurt to know some PHP. It also happens to have a very fun and lovable mascot, the elephant. PHP ant, the elephant. this fun little running guy here. That's a pro. That's a pro. All right. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of what PHP is, why you might want to consider not using it, but why you probably should know at least some of it. So diving into actually using PHP, your first step would always be checking to see if it is already installed or not. So in your terminal of choice, you can run PHP version. You can see if you do have it installed or not. If not, there are a variety of pretty good options available for installing PHP. Right now I'm on Linux, so I would probably end up using something like apt install PHP. If you are on Macintosh, you should look into Homebrew. That's probably your easiest and best bet for installing PHP through the command line. So you can write something like brew install PHP. And even on Windows, I'm not sure if everyone here has heard of it, but there is a software package manager of the desktop level for Windows. I've been loving it the last few years, called Chocolatey, where in your PowerShell, once you've installed Chocolatey, you can simply run choco install PHP. You won't have to worry about adding it to your path environment variable manually with any of these installers. They all set it up for you. So all of these are fantastic solutions. If you're more of a GUI person and you don't really want to touch the command line, I urge you to look into Examp. This system allows you to use a GUI tool to spin up or destroy your PHP servers on your computer that you can use to test basic websites and PHP functionality with ease. Though I would recommend getting familiar or at least trying the command line options, because I think it is something that can save a lot of time and add a lot of flexibility in your workflow. Once you do have it installed, then you'll have access to a variety of commands in your terminal. If you do want to play with PHP today, but don't want to run through any installation, I'll drop you a link in the chat. to an online compiler afforded to us by W3 Schools. The link's kind of floating here, but it is in the chat, and I will include it in the final README that I push up at the end of the talk today. Okay. Not all the examples we run through will work in the online compiler, just by nature of if we're editing anything in the file system, for example, that's something that would be considered protected and excluded from the online compiler. So just keep in mind there are some restrictions, but for the basic stuff, you would be able to run it there. Okay, so getting into writing PHP and running it in our command line. Okay, so we did PHP version. That's fine and dandy. We can see what version we're using. I'm going to clear that. What other commands are afforded to us? Well, one of the most simple ones, and this will be our most simple PHP program, is PHP-R, and we can pass a string as an argument here. So -R allows us to run a simple line of PHP. So I can say something like echo hello world, and I'll throw a new line character in there. PHP statements are expected to end with a semicolon, as with many languages. \n means new line. I'm using double quotes to indicate that this set of text here is a string. And echo is one of the functions we have available for printing, in this case to console, but also potentially to a web browser if it's a web request that we're responding to. So this simple line here, I can see very quickly the result in the terminal was a hello world program has run. I can also use this like a calculator, do simple stuff like 3 times 5, and we'll get that result 15. That's why I threw in the new line character in that first example, because then we see it jumbling up with the rest of my terminal jazz here. But yeah, so that's great for quick single line tests. So I find sometimes if I'm on the PHP official documentation, that is php.net, if I am reading about a specific function and I want to just run some tests, maybe I want to see how a date outputs or something, right? You can very quickly run quick tests here, right? So echo date. So what is this function going to do? I can run it and see very quickly that, okay, date with a string that says y is giving me the current year, right? So great for one-line tests. Just see how something works. For more complex tests, it's good to know that you also have PHP-A available. Now, when you run this, you're entering the PHP interactive shell. It essentially converts your command line into a little PHP interpreter where you can write multiple lines. So if I was to write a variable, that is essentially a named value I can reuse through my program, right? I'll say my var equals 10. And again, each statement ends with a semicolon. And as this is the first time we are seeing a variable, I'll point out that variables in PHP are case sensitive and they start with a $. So I can say my var equals 10, and then I can do something later with that same variable. I can echo that or do mathematical operations with that or whatever I need to do, right? I could even write functions in here and things if I wanted to. I can, because it is dynamically and weakly typed, we're also able to just reassign variables willy-nilly. I can suddenly change this to a string if I want. And it has no problem with that. Many languages would scream at you for doing this, but PHP's a-okay with it. Again, it makes it super easy to write quick and dirty scripts, but it can be difficult to tell what type to expect in and out, right? Thankfully, PHP does afford a lot of different type checking functions, but yeah, it is definitely a consideration that you should have. To escape this interactive mode, we can control C in most terminals to tell it we want to terminate that command. All right. Now, probably what I find to be one of the most useful built-in commands in PHP is, well, I think for any workflow, it's a good idea to have an interactive shell like this open. So I'm using Visual Studio Code to edit code today. And you can get away with putting two terminals side by side, right? If it cooperates here. Okay, there we go. So in a case like this, you might want to have something like PHP-A, your interactive shell, on one side so you can run quick tests. And then on the other side, we have this ability to say PHP-S, and this is actually going to prepare a PHP web server. This is intended for testing and probably shouldn't be used for live server use. But when you're developing, if you're not using a system that has another server built in like Laravel or another advanced option like Examp, you can get away with just running PHP in the terminal to host a mini server that you can interact with on your own computer. So first, let's actually set up a little project so we have something to serve. So I'll jump back to this terminal in just a moment. In my project, right now I just have a README. We'll create a, let's see here. What do we want to make for our little project? This is a really common pattern for PHP applications. You'll have a public folder, and this is typically where you'll end up having your CSS for your styling in your website, your JS for your JavaScript in your website, things like that, right? All your different assets. So maybe I'll even throw in just a main.css and a scripts.js. We won't get into these languages today, but just so we have some example code in here, or example files in here rather. I might make a new file that's going to be my index.php. This is typically a home page in a real website. And Visual Studio Code lets me get away with putting an exclamation mark, hitting tab, and it fills in our basic HTML code here for a web page. So I'm just going to say home h1 home page. And this also exposes another cool feature of PHP, is if a file is .php and you run it and you just have text or HTML, this is all echoed by default. It's just returned to the browser as is. So the simplest hello world in PHP ends up, funnily enough, being hello world, because by default, a PHP file will just echo whatever you put in it, unless you tell it otherwise. So that would technically be a hello world in a PHP if you're interpreting a file. And again, we'll see this sent back by PHP. So let's finish this this command we are writing here. So PHP -S, and often you'll use localhost to represent your current computer, 127.0.0.1 IP usually, right? We can also specify a port. So maybe for development purpose, I'll go with a port like 3000. That should hopefully be open. And there is a alternative flag we can put on here too, or an additional, I should say, flag, -t. -t lets us specify which directory we want to serve. So by default, it's going to serve the current directory. So for me, this is my projects getting started with PHP, but I can tell it because before, let me see here. Okay, that's a little better. So we have this public directory. That's where our project actually lives, the stuff we want to send the browser, right? So I can say -t and say public. So I'm specifying which folder it is. To make it more clear, I should be able to get away with as well a /. But yeah, -t is telling it to serve this specific directory. So if I try this whole command here, there we go. It says it is serving, or it's ready to serve. So in a web browser, I should be able to type in localhost 3000 And it is serving from the public directory. So I don't have to do /public or any of that fancy stuff at the end. Just localhost 3000, boom. Homepage is being served right now. And then of course, if I add to that add to this, I could of course pull in our script that we had using absolute paths, since we just have localhost when we're serving like this. I could just say /js/scripts.js if that was our file name. Yep. And then CSS. Of course, it'd be our link element. href for link /css/main.css we said, right? So we get to use these absolute paths, which is also nice for development, because when we actually launch this, we'll be using a domain name more than likely, right? Versus having to try and figure out complex relative paths. Potentially it could get complex, especially if you have subfolders for your web pages and things like this, right? This way we have a consistent place we can pull assets from, right? So just as a test, proof of concept here, if I put an alert in here, hi, or I'll say hello, PH privateers are, and in our CSS, let's do HTML background salmon, my favorite test color, and it makes your eyes bleed less than red. All right, let's see. If I refresh our web page, hello PH privateers, we got our alert. We know that the JavaScript was loaded, and the background color is a beautiful salmon color. So we do know that our CSS is also working. Beautiful. Okay. So this hasn't been a very enlightening example so far in terms of actually writing PHP. So let's look at livening this file up a little bit. Let's look at building a web form. I'm going to create another page in our public directory here called calculator.php. And I want to show you how quick and easy it can be pulling data from a submitted web form. So I'll make our H1 here. I'll copy paste some stuff here to save some time typing. Okay. Instead of home, this page is going to be called calculator. Style sheet and scripts, those look fine. H1, we'll say calculator. And I'll create a web form. So for action, I'm going to send this form to the page we're already on, but you do have the option, of course, to send it somewhere else. Calculator.php. Method equals, and we'll do a post, why not? Okay, for this basic calculator, I'll specify that this is going to be an addition calculator, just to keep things super simple. For this, we're going to need two inputs. I'll make them type number. That's usually what we do with our addition, right? Two numbers. I should give them both names. Name equals num1 and number 2. I'll put a plus between them to imply that we are adding them. And I will say equals the output element. Output. It doesn't have an autocomplete for me. That's a-okay. Okay. So the output element, we do get to actually specify. This is like a mini HTML lesson if you're not familiar with the output element, but it can also have its own name. So I'll just call it result, or sum might even be better. And we get to define which elements, which inputs are related to this output, which ones are related to this calculation. So I should actually as well throw IDs on here. num1 and num2 respectively. Okay, and it's space separated. So num1 and num2. Okay, so again, this has just been HTML so far. We haven't actually used any PHP just yet. But this is where cool features like superglobals come in to PHP. So if I want to calculate based on these two different post method submissions from this form, we can get away with a line as simple as this. And if you're curious about these tags here, remember how I said everything just outputs by default unless you say otherwise? This is how you say otherwise. This is an opening PHP tag. This is a closing PHP tag. Everything between this angle bracket question mark PHP and this closing question mark closing angle bracket will be interpreted as PHP script. So all your actual code will go between these and are not sent to the browser. So all your code will be hidden from the browser in terms of the actual backend logic. And it doesn't compromise on you being able to just structure the rest of your web page the way you normally would for an HTML file. So instead of needing a separate templating engine, which is also available in PHP, there are templating engines to make your life even easier, but out of the box, it basically works like a templating engine. So unlike many other languages, PHP was built web first in mind. When you're working with Python or something, or even Node.js, you're often bringing in right off the bat a templating engine or other add-ons to try and make it work a little easier for you to serve web pages and format web pages. PHP was built for this. So just out of the box, you don't need to install any extra stuff. Just with PHP, we can just start embedding our scripts right in our file. Yes, so we want to be using a superglobal. So this here is the post superglobal. There are a few superglobals afforded to us just, again, out of the box. This is to make our lives easy when working specifically with forms. When we submit a form, we can access this superglobal like an array. In PHP, we can access individual indices or keys in an array via square brackets. So we can say post, and then what's in these square brackets has to match just a name of one of our fields. So I can say num_1 plus, basically copy that, plus num2. And this won't echo by default. I'd have to actually say echo, or there is a shorthand if it's a really small line like this, where we can instead just put an equal here. Question mark equal. And it assumes that you want to echo whatever is in this expression. So very, very quickly, without having to write much extra anything, this should evaluate. If anything was submitted from this form, it should echo that result right here in this output. There's one more piece of this form I should add just so we can actually submit it, and that would be a submit button, of course. Type submit, value, calculate, sum. Okay, let's see this in action. Opening up our browser here. Let me switch to our /calculator.php web page here. All right, so we can see here, make that a little bigger for everybody, that right now by default, nothing and nothing is 0. Okay, that's fine. 10 plus 5 is 15. Awesome. We did lose the value in our fields though. That's, again, an easy fix. This is what I love about PHP. Everything can essentially be covered in a very quick and dirty way it's just built into the language. You don't have to fuddle around too much. After you've done these sorts of things a couple times, it's really easy to keep going. So value equals, so again, if you're familiar with HTML, we know that value is what determines what is actually showing up in these fields. So we can set the default value the same way basically that we did our calculation, just we're going to only use one of these at a time. Boom, boom. But I don't want to actually add them for these values, so I'll remove the superfluous parts here. There we go. So for the first input, we want the value to always be whatever was last posted for number 1. For the second input, we just want that output to be the second number. So now it should even persist. Let me refresh here. So that resubmitted the last request I did, which is 10 plus 5 is 15. Let's do another one. 33 and 9. Calculate sum. 33 plus 9 is 42. 42? Yeah, okay. I'm not great at mental math. That's why I have to build calculators like this. Okay. So, zooming out here, we can see how little actual PHP script it took to build this calculator. I'm not sure if there's any other languages that you could build a web page that does this with so few lines of script. The only script we actually have is echo post 1, echo post 2, echo post 1 plus post 2. That's literally the only PHP in this page, right? I don't know how it could get any lighter than this for default implementation in a language, right? This is really impressive, and this is super fun and quick to play with, right? Awesome. Okay, so we've kind of seen a basic calculator. We looked at two different syntaxes for our PHP script blocks. One that just automatically echoes whatever the expression is, and the other one that we can write whatever code we want, basically, right? And this is all running in a little PHP server using that PHP-S localhost 3000 T public, serving just like a web page would, right? So again, great for testing your web development. So fast, so easy to get started. Okay, on the note of how well this integrates into your web HTML code, I'm going to create another folder out here called, yeah, I guess we'll go with templates. That's probably a good name. So this is why we see this common pattern of having a public directory. When you're actually launching a website, it's typically considered bad form for you to have something like a templates directory that has a bunch of server-side code just sitting publicly available for people to try and poke at, right? Because most templates are dependent on other files, and they're likely to either fail or show nothing to users, or you have to go through additional steps to kind of protect these different files, right? So either there's going to be errors, you have to do a bunch of extra stuff, whatever the case may be. So for these templates that we want to add, these would typically be pieces of your web page that are repeating again and again and again, right? So even already with these are very simple web pages, right? This is just a basic home page that just has an H1, and this is a very basic home web page that just had a calculator. But we can make these even simpler, where reusable pieces like this this whole top part, if we're using the same styles and the same scripts on every single web page, we may as well yoink this and place it in another file that we can reuse. So again, we barely even need a templating language unless we want to get really integrated in a web development framework like Laravel or something like that. So let's remove that and bring it over to a template. I'm just going to call this one head.php. Okay, so the only thing about this is this doesn't look great, right? Now every page is going to say home. So we should probably do something about that. This isn't a perfect solution, but this will work for this example. Inside our title element here, we could echo something that's somewhat reusable. Page title equals uppercase words. So what I'm going to put in here, I want to be uppercase. I also want to do a string replace. Actually, here, I'll do this the other way around. I'll show you what we're going to be editing. So there's another super global called server. Again, this just comes out of the box with PHP. This is an array with a bunch of keys in it. So I want to access this time request URI. Okay, yeah, I'll show you this first. So this is an assignment. I'm assigning a variable, but once this variable's assigned, it's going to get echoed. So we still will see the contents of server request URI. Okay, so then I can reuse that variable down here. Okay, I'll revisit that UC word thing in just a second. I'll show you why I was going to use those functions. Okay, so we have our page title being assigned to request URI, and we're echoing that again down here in the H1. Let's place that in our index. So again, PHP tags we need if we want to write PHP. And to grab that template file, all we have to say is include and the path. So from this particular file, we're inside the public folder. I have to go a step out of the public folder and then into the templates folder. So ... to get out of public, and then we're going to say /templates to dive in and grab that head.php. Okay, so with any luck, this should find and execute this file, which again, if there's no PHP tags, it's just going to echo this stuff, right? Until it gets to this echo tag, and now we can echo information. So let's see if that works. I'm going to navigate back to our home page. And this isn't super helpful. It's just a slash for our home, right? So that's not super fantastic. So maybe to make this example easier, we could have a conditional or something. To make this example easier, maybe we'll call this one home for now. Now I have to go /home.php. Okay, so now this value we're getting is /home.php, which still isn't great for the user experience. So what I want to do is a string replace. I want to get rid of .php, and I want to get rid of a slash. So string replace, in PHP, we use a function. There's functions for all sorts of stuff, especially with strings in PHP. So I could say string replace, and it takes if you're familiar with JavaScript, it supports the square brackets array syntax. So I can say, let's get rid of the slash. Let's get rid of .php. We're replacing that with empty string. That's what this function does. You pass it what you want to replace, what you want to replace it with, and an input string to actually work on. So this is the before. I save, I'm going to refresh, and we're going to see the after. Now it's just home. We replaced the slash and the .php with nothing, empty string. So now we're left with just home. Okay, that's nice. And then on top of that, we probably want to uppercase that first letter. So we have lots and lots of functions to work with in PHP. So we can do uppercase words. This is a function that just uppercases the first letter in each word that it detects in a string. again, we'll refresh, and boom, home. And because I assigned here, I get to reuse that down in H1. So our title, which is the tab name up in our browser here, and our H1 are going to match. And this is a very simple, again, basically a one-liner using a couple string functions and reusing that variable. Okay. So now we have this more reusable head. So the cool thing here is when we go back to look at our web pages, instead of each one of these having a bunch of repeated HTML, now our head is just one line. And then the same thing for our calculator. All this top part is now one line. Only the unique parts of this page are showing here. There's another part that's repeating in these two pages now, right? It's this body HTML. So maybe you want to add another template real quick here. We'll say footer.php. So for this other template, we do need to close our body. That was the repeated part, right? Body and /HTML. Maybe you want to add another element here. We'll say footer. Website footer. And in here, maybe I'll say copyright. And we want the copyright year. Well, earlier, one of our experiments was actually outputting the year. So let's do it. That was our equal to automatically echo. We're going to say date, and we're just going to pass that Y, which means year. In the official documentation, you can find out how to do month, day, seconds, all kinds of stuff, right? All kinds of formatting at the touch of your fingertips. Copyright, say Warren Uhrich, all rights reserved. This is a nice way to do your footer copyright dates, because it's so easy when you're using just HTML to forget to update it after each new year, right? So you see some sites that are still saying 2006 or something. This automatically updates it. Every time someone visits the page, it's going to grab the current year, so you never have to worry. All right. And of course, this isn't going to show in our pages until I actually include it. So much like I did our head template, we'll do that again, but this time say footer. And we'll add that to our calculator as well. So you can see that each new page we're adding, all of a sudden, we only worry about the unique content for that page. So for our calculator, that is our special form that we wrote. And for our home page, we have no unique content right now. So maybe I'll just add a paragraph that says, welcome home, PH Pirate. Another thing too, I'd like to go over is how easy it is to just loop through an array. And I can't think of a better excuse for us to look at an array than our current problem we're facing in this website right now. And that's how the heck do we get from one page to another? Well, typically some sort of navigation, right? So maybe we can make a quick array of the different pages we have and then just loop through those. Otherwise, we'll always be stuck having to type in calculator and home. Also, just for ease of use right now, let me comment out this poor alert. Just so we can still confirm if we want to, I will add a console log in our JavaScript. Just so we don't have this screaming at us hello every single time I refresh. Okay. Let's refresh. Okay, there we go. Now it's not gonna show us that box every single time. Good stuff. Okay. Close to the right. Okay. So one more template. Navigation.php. Okay. So for navigation, we probably will want to use a bit of logic first thing. So I'm going to open with our tags right away. And let's just say links, or we could say nav or something, equals Again, we can use our square brackets for an array, much like in JavaScript, or another popular syntax is using the array constructor function. Either way works just fine. This time I'll use this just so we can see an example either way. PHP does allow for indexed arrays and associative arrays. So indexed array would be something like 1, 2, 3. Well, maybe I should use something a little different. Dog, cat, lizard. And if we wanted to access the second item, it starts at 0. So we'd have to say something like links 1 would be the second item. So dog would be 0, cat would be 1. We can get away with a bit more when we use an associative array though, at least for as far as links is concerned. I think we can kind of do a 2 birds with 1 stone, because the way that associative arrays work is we get a key value pair. So we get two values we can kind of work with per item in the array, instead of a simple just item like this. So for an associative, if we're doing this for a navigation, we could say something like our key name can be home and our path is home.php, right? And then about, we don't have an about yet, but we can add one real quick. About.php, and we'll do calculator, not slash calculator.php. Or we could have used some more string functions and done an indexed and made labels very easily out of our different URLs, right? But let's do it this way. We can see the key, then we have a fat arrow, and then the value that's stored under that key. So if we wanted to access a specific one in PHP, it's as simple as links, and instead of a number, we're passing that key name, right? So if I wanted to get the URL for home in this example, I could just say links home link, right? And we have that value available. So I am going to close our PHP tags, because everything outside of the PHP tags is automatically output, right? And then we'll use a nav element, as is customary in these HTML parts. I'll say website navigation, so we have a nice little heading. Make a UL, because it'll be a list of links, I'm hoping, right? And then PHP, again, comes in looking like a templating language. Beautiful, beautiful syntax here, where we can say for each. And inside here, we're going to say links as, and I could say something like link as link, and it's just going to loop through each one, grabbing the value, or we can actually grab the key and the value all at once. So maybe I'll even use a better name for this. I'll say name, fat arrow, URL. So as it's looping through each one individually, for each one and each item in this array, it's going to grab the name, the key, it's the key, right? But I'm going to call it name because we get a chance to name it whatever we want for use in our loop. So our name and our URL. We can, like many languages, use a curly brace like this to open and close our loop. And this is super cool here, right? So we open and close our PHP to start the loop, and then we can open and close to end it. End for each. So this is a standard syntax. In any of our PHP, we can open and close statement blocks like this using a curly brace. But for use in templates like this, I personally prefer using a colon, and we actually get a different way to end a for each called end for each. Now, what I love about this is when you have a whole bunch of different statements like this, having this word here tells you exactly what you're closing. So sometimes it gets kind of complex. You might have an if as well, right? You could have an if, and another for each inside, and all kinds of stuff happening, right? And every time you end up nesting more and more of this, it becomes harder and harder to figure out when you're using just curly braces. So if I convert it back to the curly brace here, when you're using just curly braces, it gets really hard to see, like, what is this ending? Especially if I've scrolled down, and if I'm down a ways in the file. What is this ending? What is this doing, right? So either you want to comment and say this is the end of an if, or we can just use their nice end if. So colon. That's the beginning of the if, that's the end of the if. And then here, again, colon, beginning of the for each, the end of the for each. So if you're embedding, right, in HTML like this, I recommend using the colon and the end syntax. If you're just writing a large block of code without a bunch of HTML, then for sure, use your curly braces. Probably easier to read there. But yeah, I think this is a really nice syntax for embedding in your HTML. Okay, so what are we doing for each? Why are we looping? So we don't have to repeat ourselves, right? We can write this piece here once, and it's going to loop through it again and again for us. So inside of a list, we want list items. For each list item, we want an anchor. For our href, we want to output where we want to go with this link. We want to go to the URL, so we're going to echo that. And then inside the A here, we are going to echo the name, because we want the user to be able to see where it is they're going by a name. But of course, the anchor needs to know the actual location as well. And there's a simple nav. And of course, if the website grows, we just keep adding onto this, and this nav will grow on its own. Let's throw this into our web pages so we can actually view it. So hopping back over to our various web pages, it would be again as simple as adding that template to our output here. So let's add that again to our calculator. So we got our head, our navigation, and then the only part that's unique in this page right in the middle, sandwiched in between. And of course, you can space that out if it's easier to read. Okay, so home, calculator, and I think we did add an about page to our nav. So let's see how quick it would be to make a new page. So if I use home as a template, boom. Right, brand new page. Just filling in whatever the unique content is. Everything else is going to be repeated. Let's have a look in our browser and make sure I didn't make a grave mistake. There we are, website navigation. Click on about, I'm on about. I'm on the calculator. I'm back home. Nice. That's what I'm talking about. Calculator still work. 6 plus 3 is 9. There we go. Beautiful. So all of this, that quick. Yeah, basically a whole website. What was that? I talked a bit of theory and history for PHP at the first little bit. So honestly, probably 30, 40 minutes. We basically have a website with modular pieces that we can decide to reuse on a page-by-page basis. We've separated our concerns in terms of what the user should see and templates behind the server wall, which is a lot more secure, right? So very cool, very fast, lovely to play with. I don't want to hold you for too much longer, but I did want to go over one more example here, I think, just as again, a proof of concept of how fast and easy this language can be to use. I'm just going to create a loose PHP file here. One called, what do we want to call it? We'll call this one writefile.php. And I want to show you how fast you can easily write data and read data. So in many languages, that could end up being a whole process. But PHP, if you're going one of the simplest routes, it's not much more than a function or so. Let's assume we have an array of information. I'm going to cheat and copy paste one that I was looking at earlier, just so I don't have to type a bunch of stuff here. And look, it's even an array about PHP stuff, so fancy. Okay, so we have some information we can work with here. Let's say we want to store this in a file. We could say something like file, put contents, and all we have to tell it is the name of the file. This is a list of PHP frameworks, so I'll name our file phpframeworks.json or .txt, I guess. Actually, yeah, okay. So this is one extra step. We probably don't want to try and store a raw PHP array because that's a data type that PHP understands but won't be understood in a file. So our step in between is actually going to be converting it to a string. One of the easiest conversions we can do is JSON, as that's understood by most languages, most frameworks, and is fairly human readable. It's essentially often key value pairs or lists of values depending on what is stored. So in this case, it would be a bunch of key value pairs in an array, right? So if we want to convert this PHP array into a JSON string that we can easily store, it's not very spooky. All we got to say, I'll say PHP frameworks JSON string, just using detailed variable names, equals JSON encode. We pass it that array. And this will convert that array into a JSON string. And now we can pass that very easily into this file. So really, we only have 2 lines we're worried about here. Just making sure that it's going to be some sort of a string, and then writing that to a file that we can hopefully read later. So let's give that a run. I'm going to open a fresh terminal here. And what have we got in our project? Our write file PHP is present in this directory. And here's our final PHP command for the day. The most basic one you'll end up using a lot if you're just testing file by file, or if you're writing command line software in PHP. If you type in PHP space and then a file path, your PHP interpreter will run that file or will parse that file. So I can say PHP write file, hit enter, and it's going to try to run that file. Okay, I don't see any errors, so allegedly that ran. Let's run ls to see what's in my directory. Look at that, a brand new file, phpframeworks.json. If you're in a bash terminal, you can run cat on that to see what the contents are. And again, look at that. That's all of our content as JSON. Of course, if you're more GUI oriented, we can also confirm in here that yes, there is a new file, and it is containing all of that information. Very fast, very easy. One-liner, and if this was already a string, we wouldn't even have to have worried about JSON. But imagine you're working with a API, and you want to retrieve JSON from a web page or something, right? An API out there. How do we read information? It's just as easy. Just as quick, just as easy. Again, we want to open PHP if we're going to use PHP. And this time, instead of file put contents, we're going to say file get contents. And we just have to pass it a file name. So what is that file we wrote called? PHP frameworks.json, right? So this variable should now contain the string let's just echo it to confirm. Read file contents. Okay, let's see if that works. Okay, PHP, read file, and it was able to access that information. If we want to use the information we got from that endpoint or from that file as a proper PHP array again, we can convert it just as easily. We end up using, instead of JSON encode, JSON decode. Let's see. Okay, so PHP data is going to equal whatever is decoded from that string that we got up here. And I don't really want to echo a raw array, so I'm going to use vardump. When you're troubleshooting in PHP, vardump is beautiful. It tells you the data type and what's stored inside. So this vardump is a very, very powerful tool. Okay, PHP data. Let's run that again and see what's in our vardump. There we go. And look, this is nicely formatted too. It's nice on new lines. It tells us the data type of every single value in here. It says string and then 20 characters long. String, 18 characters long. So vardump is fantastic for breaking things apart and seeing what's inside. This is actually an object, a PHP object. So something to keep in mind is JSON decode has a flag you can add to, I think if you put true here, it would come back forced as an array, associative array. If you don't, and this actually is an object, we can tell by curly brace. If you don't, it'll actually create a PHP object. So something to keep in mind, that if we wanted to get a specific value, let's look at our stuff in here. So let's say I wanted to get cake PHP. Objects, we don't use the square brackets to access like an array. If we want to access an object property, you'd have to use the arrow syntax like this. So I could say cake PHP, as long as that matches what it was in our file here. Cake PHP, yep, that should work. We should be able to get the link for that entry in our information. Okay, let me clear this, and we will run the file again. And there we go, cakephp.org, if you wanted to learn more about that particular framework. So it's just something to keep in mind, yeah, that there is, it will convert not only to arrays but to objects unless you add that force to an array option there. Okay. Okay. All right. So yeah, within about an hour, we created a website filled with templating. We looked at how form submissions are handled in PHP. We looped through an array. We manipulated a string. We were able to write a file and then read that contents back and convert it into a data type that is accessible by the language. Something to keep in mind about file get contents is you're not necessarily forced to only read local files. I should, in theory, also be able to read external websites and things like this too. Let's try our command in the terminal here. I'm not sure if this will work. I didn't run a test on this before. But PHP-R to write our one-liner here. And let's see if this works. I'll say echo file get contents. That was the name of our function, right? File get contents, and pass that a URL. Let's say http:// Let's see if we actually get that result. Or heck, why not? Why not phpadventures.com? Shameless plug. Okay. And there we go. It actually did grab that website content. So if you're reaching out to an API instead of a web page, you could grab JSON, manipulate it, and work it into your app right away. Again, that easy. In a single line or two, you have all that data at your fingertips. PHP is built for this stuff, and I think it's a beautiful thing. It's so quick and easy to play around with. There, of course, is, like any language, a bit of a learning curve at the start, where you're learning all the popular function names, but it's also a really well-documented language. So if you get familiar with that php.net website, searching for different functions and looking through their documentation pages, there's all sorts of information here that's available. And if this isn't quite the format that you like, it's a little dry, that W3 Schools I mentioned earlier is a fantastic resource as well. So W3 Schools, PHP, they have this nice sidebar here with all sorts of topics. You want to know how to do math? You want to know how to do strings? You want to know how to manipulate arrays, use regex, handle forms, look at everything's here. Everything you could want to do getting started is going to be available in this nice left sidebar here. So amazing resource, not just for PHP, but for other languages too, but the PHP one is pretty good. I also am a sucker for the O'Reilly Safari series, so I plug this a lot with my students. These books, I really like these books. The O'Reilly books are high quality. They find people who are really good at what they do in the field, and sometimes even the creators of the languages, to speak on the best way to approach problems. All sorts of chapters on popular topics in these books. So if you're a reader, go for those. All right. That's about everything I wanted to go over in terms of our getting started in PHP talk. Hopefully that gives people some ideas on how to whip up a website and start playing around with variables, and the rest you can find on something like W3 Schools or potentially in a future meeting here. Thank you all for your time. And I guess before we close off here, my question, I kind of asked you, Ivan, a bit earlier in the meeting, but after having gone through this, is there any feedback anyone has or anything they want to see in a future meeting, whether it's a topic or a suggestion about the format of the topic covered here?
Hey, yeah, thanks for the presentation. It's very clear that you know something about giving these technical talks and the such. Just wanted to start off with that. Yeah, coming from the Dev Edmonton chat, like some of the other meetups, like the Python one, the Exchange GIS one. Yeah, like the format, I think it's pretty good. Especially since like you present well on these. I think the Dev Edmonton like user group is a bit more like I'd say like intermediate focused. So I've noticed that they usually do like a news section at the start. So that
Okay.
might be something you think about. Yeah, at the worst, like it's just kind of like a conversation starter. Um, in their cases, usually there are like they try to find a talk every single time, but yeah, it's always nice having like table talk, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
subjects.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Is there any particular topics you're interested in for a future talk in PHP?
Oh, gee, I have no idea since I don't really work with the with the language that much. I guess like on that note with like kind of like news and whatnot, like just for example, if you come to like the Python meetup or like the Exchange JS meetup, they give like news about new things in new versions of like Django or Node or just popular frameworks like that. So I think that yeah, that might be something interesting to look into.
All right. Yeah, I can definitely look into including a news update at the beginning of each chat here. Here, I'll drop in the chat as well a list of potential topics I've been considering for down the road. But as a beginner, if you are interested, I could look into including at least some beginner topics in terms of like, oh, what are the data types, or how is object-oriented programming handled in PHP, things like that, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, like for in terms of like talk content, yeah, yeah, intro or intermediate stuff it seems to be like kind of the or demos of apps and breakdowns is usually pretty interesting.
News, demos, breakdowns. All right, I gotcha. All right. Ivan, anything from your end after having sat through our first official talk?
Well, first of all, thanks for your presentation, and I definitely learned a lot. And I think it's really cool to know that you can just spin up a simple PHP server from the command line. I'm definitely going to take that away and use it when I'm testing things and doing things locally. Um, as I said in the chat here, I think that like continuing with additional practical topics like you covered today would be really helpful. So, for example, today we learned how to build a really basic website with PHP and pull in dynamic contents. I'm sorry, pull in shared content across multiple templates. So after like I'm leaving this talk knowing how to do something almost from start to finish, you know, and if I'm not a newbie to this, but at the same time, like, you know, if I had no background in PHP and I was learning this for the first time, I feel like I got a lot of value out of the talk. And even though I have some PHP experience, I also got a lot of value out of the talk. So I think having some of these meetups be structured like that, where we're kind of setting out to walk away with like a skill or something we can do, and then by the end of it, we hopefully will have that skill and we can always maybe watch the talk again. I think that's awesome. So that's what I would kind of hope for in future talks if
Awesome.
possible.
Awesome. All right. I really do appreciate the feedback. That's the stuff that's going to keep this sort of meetup alive, is finding out what people want to engage with in the talks and the meetups, seeing what people's favorite and least favorite parts are, so we can keep streamlining it moving forward. So again, I appreciate you guys taking the time to offer that feedback and talk to me.